Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me today is Vox. Vox. Yeah. I'm one of these days. I'm going to get a bad reputation for not even Publius. Publius. How are you, Vox?
Just call me the voice,
Oh,
right?
there you
Of
are.
reason, of truth, of awesomeness, of
Of humility,
you know,
of
of
yeah.
humility, of grace, of intelligence,
Oh dear. Well,
of
hold on. I gotta write this down. Hold on.
whatever.
It's a long list.
Right? I am good. I'm good. It's warming up. It's fantastic. I've been able to run outside the last couple of days. It's always better to run outside on the ground than it is on a treadmill or something like that. So that's fantastic. I've got birds in the yard. And of course, what does all that mean? Yard work. So, no, really, everything is fantastic here. I hope you're doing well.
I am busy, which is kind of sort of my main default. Either I'm busy or completely shut down. I don't seem to have I can't really seem to pace myself. But so we're actually broadcasting now. Maudie finally convinced me to get an iMac, and I got an iMac. The software that we use can only run on Windows, so we're doing boot camp, the whole 9 yards, because I can't do anything simple, right? So this is actually now coming from a brand new computer, usually a new camera. I'm using the old camera for now, but it's I'm excited. I think there's a lot. It clearly the connection's better. Everything's better. I'm looking forward to it. But it's just like, okay, let's just rebuild the entire show one more time and put it on another machine.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? You know what they say: if it's broke, break it some more.
Yeah, and if it ain't broke, then break it. So you got something to do. Yeah, so busy, but you know what? Family's good, wife's good, kids are good. My daughter is switching from part-time homeschool. She's the hybrid. One's home the whole time. The other one's hybrid, and they are switching to. One of them, she's switching to full-time now going in, so we'll have to see. I'm a little nervous about it, but it is what it is. The district is insisting. So, which we need to have. I'd like to get. I'm sorry, what?
I said awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to get back to, we got to get back to sort of discussing some of the more political stuff, and overtime. The news isn't what it used to be, so it doesn't feel like we always hit the threshold for overtime, but definitely want to start to mark some events and how the world is once again changing. So look forward to overtime with you on Thursday. We've got on. We're looking to do. We have a professor of. A climatologist who we're planning on bringing on to discuss a lot of stuff about sort of where we really are with climate change, try to put some hysteria down, put maybe up some hysteria, I don't know, but try to really understand it better. You had the virologist, which I'd like to get on to discuss the COVID vaccines, where we stand with that, and where what the likelihood is of these variants sort of really getting out of control, and what we know and what we don't know. So we've got that coming up, and then I think you're right too about the Economist. So lots that we're planning on doing, and if you Vox, if you've got any shows you want to do, let me know. I think the Economist talking modern economic theory would be. I'm looking forward to it because I knew nothing about it.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to the show tonight. I am really looking forward to this.
All right, so caveat.
We have John
please.
Shook.
Yes, Dr. John Shook on meta-ethics, and a caveat on this: meta-ethics is not only not my specialty, but it's ethics in general for some reason, where it's just the philosophy classes I never enjoyed. Now, mine was just a BA in philosophy, but I stayed out of epistemology and metaphysics.
Stuff that you learn it, you kind of cognize it, and then you say, oh, but wait, that prevents me from doing all the fun stuff in life, so then you ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna probably be just sort of I'm gonna keep an eye on the live chat. I may drop in every now and then, and just if I have a couple of questions. But I think Vox is going to be mostly on you with Dr. Shook, and it sounds like he's got some plans in mind. So without any further ado,
Yes, it does.
Yes, he does. I would like to welcome Dr. John Shook, who is muted. So if he could unmute himself and say hello.
Hello, world.
Hey, how are you? How have you been?
Hello, Dr. Shook.
About as well as could be expected. I'm doing fine.
That's good. Well, it's good to have you back. And last time, we did say we'd try to allocate a little more time for both you and Vox, because the two of you sort of seem to butt heads a little bit, and I anticipate a little bit more of that tonight. So I am going to do the smart thing and stay out of it. I'm just gonna let the two of you. This is my show, which means I get to hide behind my chair if I so choose, and I think this may be one of those occasions. So, well, I think if we could just have a quick definition of what is metaethics, and then I think Vox wants to take it from there. So, what is metaethics?
Metaethics is a very recent term. It used to just be called moral philosophy. That is to say, you can study morality directly as people talk about it and enact it and more or less try to follow it. That might be called moral anthropology or sociology of morals. You know, what do people think they're doing in the real world? Then you can do moral philosophy, which asks questions like, well, morality seems to be the sort of thing that people talk about as if they really think it exists, that it's more than just what makes people happy, or it's more than just something we invented, or it's it's something that people really prioritize. So then, why do they prioritize it? If we're doing it and trying to do it, can we do it better? But if we're going to try to do it better, what do we do with all of this moral disagreement? Which then leads on to meta-ethical questions like, yeah, what is it about all this disagreement about morality? Does that mean, A, we're not really trying to be moral, we just talk a good game? That could be one answer. Maybe there's a lot of moral language and not too much moral action. Or if there is moral action, what would make it better? What would improve it? Sort of puts the ethics in meta-ethics. Ethics traditionally has always been a branch of philosophy that says, well, if people are at least paying lip service and trying to be good, or at least making their children, friends and neighbors better people, what could do this more effectively? What would be the conditions allowing the virtues to flourish, or allowing people to be more obedient and submissive to morality? But if there are better and worse moral rules, what is it that makes them true and valid? So this becomes what might be called the validity problem, which would solve the disagreement problem. In other words, there was hope that by the study of morality, how we talk about morality, the psychology of morality, even the anthropology of morality, we could somehow get a convergent view on why there are such things as moral truths, and if there are moral truths, what in the world could possibly be responsible for making them true? And in that sense, metaethics takes on the same sorts of tasks in neighboring departments of philosophy, like the study of aesthetics. Aesthetics is the philosophical inquiry into why people pursue art, why people think there's a difference between better art and worse art, why there's so many artistic traditions, why is art so different around the world, and yet everybody is either making, enjoying, or consuming art. It seems very human. Similarly, then, metaethics would be interested in these deepest questions. Evidently, it's really important to humans. What should we do about it? So that would be my thumbnail sketch. But if you want a real quick definition of metaethics, something catchy and memorable. Try this on for size. You're doing metaethics when you're wondering, is morality more like A, math, or B, is it more like money, or C, is morality more like myth? And those might not be the only three options. I'm going to later on tonight push real hard for a fourth option. But is morality more like math, money, or myth? And depending on your leanings, which way you think is the better analogy, that's going to explain an awful lot about what you think about metaethics and how it should be done. Philosophers who pick math are not going to have productive conversations with people who pick money or intellectuals who pick myth. So metaethics is also an opportunity for just a lot of crosstalk, not a lot of shared presuppositions, and a lot of wasted time. But hey, that's philosophy, right?
So I understand that you would like to use me almost as a guinea pig and run some questions past me to kind of say maybe pick apart my views.
You may not know what your views are, but we're going to do this Socratically, which means gently. What do you think if you could only choose among those three very intriguing options? Is morality more like math? Is it more like money? Or is it more like myth? And while you're pondering that, let me just sort of lay out what's at stake so you know what you're choosing from. You know what math is. Math is the sort of thing that's thoroughly human. All human societies do basic math. They have math language. It's intertranslatable. In other words, Chinese math turns out to be identical with Mayan math, turns out to be identical with Roman math and our math. There's really only one math, and if there are cultural differences, it has to do with sort of geniuses for this or that area of math. And then, if cultures sort of consult each other, they fill out the same thing, math, and all of its subfields. And in math, we expect such things as the right answer. It's a very rational procedure, and it aims at truth. Now, mistakes are made, calculations are difficult, advanced math is not for everybody. But when you're doing math, there's a sense that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and it ain't up to you. If you get the wrong answer, you're the problem, not the math. So that's one option for morality. Lots of people think the morality is more like math. Well, the second option is it might be more like money. That is to say, it's very human, very human. In other words, we long ago, perhaps before memory and time in history, started creating of fungible, convertible units of just something, anything. It could be shiny jewelry, it could be beads, it could be coins, it could be rocks, it could be shells. But at any rate, the idea of money over and above all of the actual goods and services we consume. And it just proved so amazingly useful that to this day, it's very difficult to find any society on the planet that doesn't have something like money. And you can find them if you really look hard, very small indigenous societies. But it turns out that even those small societies, they kind of get what money is. They may have had it when they were bigger and more successful, sort of driven to the extremes and margins now by modern societies. They're not doing so well. But there's just something about money that humans get because we invented it. And it just proves so useful that it could go digital, it could take any form, but it's hard to imagine money ever really going away. We need liquid exchange value in addition to, concrete stuff we like in our houses. So morality could be like that, invented but universal because it's just indispensable, and there's lots of life that has nothing to do with money, and that's actually a good thing. And morality might be like that too. The third option is that it's myth. The reason why we talk so much about morality is because most people aren't actually doing it. That doesn't mean that we aren't speaking very sincerely and honestly. We have this thing called a conscience, and we have various feelings and motives, but it's a collective illusion. It's a story that somehow got started long ago. In that sense, it's invented like money. But unlike money, it's a myth, meaning it can be exposed as actually pretty useless. We aren't really doing it, as opposed to money. No, economics is very real. That's not a collective illusion. As myth, morality would be more psychological. We have all kinds of self-delusions to make us feel better, to assuage our consciences, to fool other people into thinking that we're worthier than we really are because we're about to stab them in the back, which is the actual human thing that we really want to do. So that's what I mean by morality being more like myth. It doesn't have any fundamental reality standing behind it, and it doesn't even have a kind of universal utility value upholding it. It's just a nice story that most of us really, really cling to, like, I don't know, Santa Claus or a religion near you. But it doesn't do any work. It doesn't actually affect real human behavior when nobody's watching.
A lie agrees.
So I think I would say that given those three options, and I'm not sure anyone, is like exactly what I would go in with, but I think myth is going to be a category that best describes what I would take morality to be. Because I do think like math sounds a little bit, because I do think that there is a right answer. I just think that right answer is that it's myth. So I think myth is probably going to be what best, out of those three options, what best describes my view of morality.
All right. Well, because you're a worldly person of the real world, I'm going to get you to change your mind in under 2 minutes. Why do we punish people for moral transgressions? What do we think is going to be accomplished?
Oh, well, what do we think? I think we think there's a great many things that are going to be accomplished by that, depending on
which ones are actually accomplished. Because you picked the myth, and so we're going to have to start looking behind the curtain, behind the veil, distinguishing illusion from what's really happening in the real world. What real world changes happen because we punish children, young adults, older adults? Does anything really happen?
Well, I guess the real thing that occurs is they're removed from society for a period of time, depending on the severity of the action. So they're not doing any more bad things while they're in that
So punishment is an imposition of suffering, such as loss of liberty, or it could be a fine of some sort.
It's definitely a form of imposition, yes.
Yes. And what do you think this usually does to a typical person's future conduct? Does it make any difference whatsoever?
Generally speaking, in the American fields, I would say it worsens their behavior, and in European fields,
children?
I think.
Remember, you're speaking for billions that have lived on this planet. I'm asking you for a statistical generalization. Hearsay and odd exceptions are not allowed here. Is there a reason why parents morally punish their children? Do they think it changes the future course of their conduct?
I think that they think that, yes.
Are parents fundamentally in error about this expectation of the difference between a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old? All parents around the world. Are they suffering from some sort of delusional belief?
Yeah. I think that they. Nick, you've got a lot of background noise, by the way.
Sorry. All right. Thank you.
I think that that action can change people's behavior.
So you think there's a difference in conduct, observable, behavioral? I don't mean anything subjective or Cartesian.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
You think there's a difference in typical conduct between a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old?
Oh.
Due to, among other things, moral punishment.
No, I don't. I think a 4-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 40-year-old just maybe a little bit more mature in the way they act. So I think a 4-year-old throws a fit, and I think a 40-year-old throws a fit. I think we tend to punish them.
Statistically, we see 40-year-olds throwing as many fits in the public streets as a 4-year-old.
No, I wouldn't. No, okay. So now I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So So I think obviously the punishment has changed the behavior, molded the behavior of people.
So you believe on the record that moral punishment tends to, statistically speaking, across largest populations, modify habitual conduct in human beings?
Yeah.
So you think morality has real effects in the real world?
No, I don't think morality has a real effect.
You just admitted that morality has real effects in the real world because we were talking about moral punishment. There are other kinds of punishment, like pure vengeance or, selfish retribution. But I was speaking of moral punishment. That is to say...
if I may, what I would say is I understand that calling it a moral punishment is what they believe it is. I just think it's punishment. I don't think that they're doing morals, so to speak, right? I think that they...
Sorry. I'm sure you don't believe that, and let me give you an example. Okay. If you're responsible for the behavior of a 4-year-old, and the 4-year-old is observed torturing a cat, do you punish the child, A, because you feel sorry for the cat, or B, because you think mainly... in addition to feeling sorry for the cat, you ought to do that. You in addition, think that the child has done something morally wrong.
Well, so obviously I feel sorry for the cat, and obviously I don't think that that is an agreeable action for anybody to take, and so obviously I want to change that behavior, but I don't think there's anything.
So you think the behavior is wrong then?
I don't think it's good. I wouldn't say it's wrong.
You've never raised children then?
Well, I have two. I don't think so when I hear the word right and wrong, I think of like this idea that I have this almost universal obligation. Like if something is wrong, right? Like if somebody says like this is wrong to do, what I hear from that is you should not do this. There is no instance in which this would ever be agreeable for you to do. I think that's
sometimes it's okay to torture cats by 4-year-olds. Sometimes.
I don't think there's. I can imagine a scenario where it would be okay for a child to torture a cat. Sure.
Is a parent going to commonly encounter this?
No.
So that's not really a counterexample, is it? We're talking about actual parenting in the real world. But you were onto something earlier. When you hear right and wrong, your mind immediately goes to universal dogmatic laws that are exceptionless for all time, space, and dimensions. Is that what comes to
categoricals? Yeah, categoricals, yeah.
So now we've uncovered what we can label, and we're going to have to keep tabs on it, what's called a false dichotomy. And this happens all the time in any branch of philosophy. But you think that you're making a good case for your position by assuming that there are only two positions and there's something wrong with the other one. You don't like the math analogy with morality. And there are very good reasons to not like the math analogy. The math analogy is full of rules and formulas and strict rationalistic methods to obtain universally correct answers, and if you don't subscribe to them, yada, yada, yada. But this is a false dichotomy, because remember our third option that I gave you at the beginning. Mm-hmm. It could be more like money. Mm-hmm. And that's why I got on and on about this business of actually altering habitual conduct in people, which if morality does anything, it at least surely does that. But I wasn't trying to send you in the direction of math, and you just shot off a red herring argument by claiming you didn't like, the math theory. I don't want you to like the math theory, actually, either. That's not my preferred theory. But I am trying to at least steer you towards the money theory. In other words, money is real, even though it's an invention. You see what I'm saying? We made it up, but it's so incredibly useful, and there doesn't seem to be any practical substitute. Or if you invented one, you'd just end up reinventing the same thing and calling it something else. Yeah. Morality is probably more like money than like math, precisely because you commonsensically admitted that assessing and imposing moral judgments on others backed with punitive measures really does statistically, typically across large populations, produce tremendous alterations of conduct, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Just like money, actually.
Yeah.
just like money.
And of course, and of course, I did say that, like, the three categories, like I didn't agree with any of them completely, but myth seemed to be the one I agree with the most. I would agree that I believe that most people believe that morals are things, and I believe that because of that, morals have a lot of utility. But simply because I believe that you believe something, and I can see that fiction has a lot of utility to it, doesn't mean that it actually exists.
Does money actually exist?
Sure, yeah.
Why?
The concept of money exists. Yeah, absolutely.
No. I didn't ask about the concept of money. I asked whether money exists. Does money exist?
Question. I'm
Currency
unsure,
exists,
actually.
but
Currency, yeah,
but
currency exists.
There's a distinct
money.
Difference. Yeah.
That's a good question, Dr. Shook. I don't know if I have an answer for that.
Yeah, I think that if philosophers spent more time figuring out the metaphysics of money, most metaethical questions about morality would dissolve or have their obvious answers.
I guess my question for money would be, and this is, and again, of course, I'm coming at this, and what I'm hoping you will be able to do is maybe like move around my own presuppositions and biases, because obviously I'm coming at this from a position that I already believe is correct, and so I guess my question with the money thing or anything would be like, is there a property of money that is not queer? It's not strange. It's not weird. It's something that falls in with all the other properties that we can find, that we can discover, that we can learn something about. Because it seems that that's what morals lacks. It's not that we don't have like robust definitions of morals. It seems that we can't discover them. Seems that we would need something extra. And in fact, I think Christians or Muslims or Jews or religious people actually have an interesting workaround of this. They say, well, the soul is how we find moral properties, which in turn can give us moral rules or laws, which in turn can give us moral systems. And that's fantastic and fanciful, and I don't believe in disembodied mind, so the soul's kind of out for me. But if I don't have that thing that can sense this property, then I'm left with this idea that even if they did exist, I don't think I can find them.
I think we can, and it'll take under 5 minutes if you just stick with me. We're going to do the ontology of money first, and then we're going to do the ontology of agriculture, and then the ontology of morality. So,
nice.
With money, does the value of a dollar bill today depend on whether you as an individual or I as an individual happen to fancifully agree with what a dollar will buy? Is it subjective? Is the value of money subjective in that individualistic sense I was describing? No. So we're agreed money is not subjective. What that means is that it's not subject to mass delusion. It's not subject to mass hysteria. It's not subject to it's not illusory. That is to say, in some sense, it exists independently of whether or not you or I happen to like it or even think it. Here's another example. Whatever the current value of the Chinese currency is today doesn't depend on our ignorance of it, right? I don't happen to know the current, what the current value of Chinese currency is, but that doesn't panic the Chinese, does it?
No, not at all.
No. So now we've discovered that money is objectively real in a second sense. That is to say, a particular currency has its value even though large swaths of humanity are ignorant of it. Instead, its ontology is what is called social. It has a social ontology. That is to say, it exists, it's perfectly objectively real, but in a social ontological sense. That is to say, it requires the common consent and habit of all the people that are participating in that economy with that currency. Now, the folks who love the myth theory then get all excited and say, well, you're just talking about a collective fiction, a delusion. But we already know they're wrong, don't we? The ontology of money can't be like that. If it were, then a sufficiently large number of us could just decide tomorrow that it's worth something completely different. Now, there is a sector of fungible exchange value that is like that. What's been happening to GameStop stocks?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So there are some financial instruments that are currently valued only what sort of a certain set of people popularly think that it's valued. Stocks can be like that, other financial instruments. But your fundamental currency can't be like that, or you have what is called an economic meltdown, and soon you're not going to have a fungible currency.
Well,
so
the
ontology of the currency isn't even dependent on what large numbers of people wish it, were.
Yeah, because if it was, we would wish it was valued at what it was in the 1940s, and it'd still be making what we're making today.
Well, I agree that it's not what we wish, but it does strike me that it is still. It's what we've collectively agreed upon, and if we as a society suddenly decide that the dollar has no value, then the dollar has no value.
So that's the utility argument. If you think that of the three options, math, money, and myth, it's more like money, then the utility value of morality is going to take center stage. That is to say, we would expect morality to be the sort of thing, like any human invention, to be judged on its not just utility, but sort of irreplaceable utility. That is to say, if you want to live in a society any more advanced than the Stone Age, you could collectively decide to abandon one currency, but all that means is you'll pick a different currency. You're not getting rid of money. You just aren't.
Which is why, the communists hate us all.
So what that means is, for the ontology of money, is that now we've discovered it's objectively real in a third sense. Not only isn't it subjective, it's not subject to mass illusion or fantasy, and it is in some sense an irreplaceable utility value, deeply intertwined and interconnected with most else about our not just economy, but most of the rest of our culture that we deem to be valuable, precisely because it's the fungible exchange unit. Now, fortunately, there's plenty about human culture that cannot be reduced to the almighty dollar, and that's good. We don't need complete utility, but it's irreplaceable in the sense that it's not going anywhere. What it's good for, it'll continue to be good for, and we might even improve it. And in fact, societies tinker with their conception of currency all the time, but they do it objectively. That is to say, they have in mind objective utility standards for messing around with how the currency works, and it either objectively works or it doesn't. That is to say, there are real world consequences, not just what anybody wishes or hopes would happen or fantasizes about, that are going to come around and bite you if you mess with the currency in the wrong way. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I haven't changed my mind yet, but I would agree with everything you said so far.
Well, you've given me the time to set you up for the analogy. Absolutely. The reason why morality is more like money than myth is for all the reasons I just got you to agree to. It's objective in 4 senses. 1, it's clearly not subjective. That is to say, whether it exists or not doesn't depend upon the whims of any individual or the collective delusional belief of any number of collective individuals. It has an irreplaceable utility value, which, by the way, explains why all of humanity gets around to inventing it and continues to use it. And it has so many other real world consequences that we care about that it's inextricably intertwined with all the other real stuff that we take for granted is perfectly socially real in our common sense ontology. I got 4 objective facts about the ontology of money, and I simply claim that morality shares at least those 4 features.
So I guess in following that, my first most obvious question would be, it seems that you have posited that there's something discoverable about morality. But early on, you pointed out that we fight about morality all the time, not only amongst academics, but in the real world. And of course, fighting over morality and fighting over what morality is correct has caused a lot of issues, a lot of harm. So if we posit for a moment 2 different societies and, one says circumcision of male babies is correct and the other one says circumcision of male babies is incorrect. What seems, if I just ask, what is, the inference to the best explanation here, that there is this, that one of these societies has discovered something about circumcision as it relates to the process and what it produces and everything like that, that they are correct, that we should either do circumcision or we should not do circumcision, or that they're both correct or they're both wrong, depending on the conditions that they find themselves in a particular environment. Maybe this culture lives in a jungle and it's really humid outside, so circumcision would be better. This culture lives in a desert, so there's not as much chance for infection because of whatever. and it seems that, of course, the answer to that question is just going to be no. Neither one of these societies has stumbled across a fact of the world as to whether or not circumcising a baby is right or wrong. It just seems that based on the conditions these people find themselves in at this given time, maybe that was the best thing that they could do for the health and well-being of their society. And then, of course, the question becomes, well, the feelings that are produced about that, what seems more likely, again, that we found some fact, or is it just that as we move from savanna war apes to the, upstanding society that we are now, that we have evolved in such a way as to develop these tendencies so we don't, destroy ourselves, eat our children, so to speak. And it seems that, to me at least currently, that is a better explanation for why we behave the way we do and what we do, as opposed to there is this thing, morality.
Well, you've proven to be a moral realist if you take evolution seriously, but I haven't dragged evolution into it. It does support the money option over math or myth, but can we postpone that? You said something very interesting earlier about your specific example of a surgical procedure, procedure. So if you followed my money ontology, we have the simplest explanation. What we have here is, of course, as with anything that is a social tool, there's going to be what you might call lag time. That is to say, during the time of its invention and greatest utility, the way it was, culture was a certain way, but culture and society changes and drifts. But we're conservative about our money. We tend not to give it away, and we tend to prefer its preservation of value. And that's also, analogously, accurate enough about morality. But what that means is that you can find two different cultures out of sort of temporal or developmental sync with each other. That is to say, if you had cultures at various stages of development, you would find their moralities more similar than other kinds of societies that are at very different stages of cultural development. What that means is morality, like any tool, can be improved. Morality is not like math. It's not static. It's not out there in the world waiting to be discovered, like Columbus bumping into America. It's like money, which means that it has a social ontology. Now that gives us hope, because on the fourth objectivity condition, if various moral rules are intricately interconnected with much of the rest of what is valuable going on in society, people, if they are intelligent, will notice. And those who notice are ethicists. And they will come up with arguments and good reasons why a practice should either be conserved, or it should be modified, or it should be abandoned. Now notice, as with any tool, we're cognitive about it. So we are defending a view in metaethics that's called moral cognitivism. That is to say, it's essential to the practice and language of morality that people can, and frequently do, give a wide variety of reasons for justifying either conservative moral judgments, don't change anything, or progressive moral judgments, let's modify things, or throw out a few rules, replace them. We do this, it's social reengineering, and morality should be a part of it. Only your staunchest fundamentalists and dogmatists, and not surprisingly mythicists about morality, are unintelligent. But what we need to do is we need to find out, like with a currency, what work is your form of currency actually doing in the rest of your society? Is it really as valuable as it could be or it should be? Hence, we should be cognitivists about our currency. We should be cognitivists about our morality, precisely because there are good reasons, sometimes, good justifications for modifying it and hopefully improving it. This is an experimentalist approach to money and to morality. And I'm bringing this up because you and I have already had a conversation about truth. You remember our conversation about truth? Yeah. Viewers at home, watch our video about truth from, a month or two ago. And you remember the difference between the deductivists and the inductivists and the abductivists. Morality, because it is a piece of social engineering, is in the abductivist area. That is to say, the reasonable person is willing to experiment with it should broader social and cultural conditions appear to reasonably demand it. This explains two things. Number one, the endless cognitive debates between conservatives and progressives. That's okay because they're doing it intelligibly and intellectually. However, that doesn't make morality like math. This is social experimentation. There's no need to converge on a unique answer that's going to stand for all time. That's a tool that's just going to be useless in another 200 years. That nobody wants that. So, as with currencies, we continue to try to improve them precisely because they are so tightly geared with everything else we find necessary and valuable in our society and in our culture. Recommendations to societies that we think have backwards or immoral moral rules, what we need to do is put on our moral anthropology lenses, immerse ourselves, and make internal recommendations for modifications on their grounds, on their turf, and collaborate with ethicists immersed in that culture. You just can't run around imposing one culture's preferred moral rules on another. Look at the disasters when one economy imposes its currency and its economic conventions on a very different kind of culture. You've got disaster. It tends to tear societies apart. So what you've got to do is instead view this as social engineering, because you're dealing with a social ontology, and the idea is we deserve to have experiments to see what might be better or worse. Absolute truth is off the table. That has no meaning here in experimentalism, but we do have a right to try to get from worse to better.
So I think I understand what you're trying to say to me, and I think I agree with you, because I think what you're saying, and I'm going to use some words, and if anybody in the audience has a misunderstanding what these words are, please feel free to ask the questions. Nick is watching. It sounds to me, and I think this is because where my reading, where I come from with morals is, I guess, probably 150 years behind where we are kind of now, maybe. So when I think of morality, I generally think of the universal, unassailable thing. It's going to be wrong all the time in any environment. So like murder, right? Or when we talk about the ethical decalogue in the Bible, right? We have the 10 ethical commandments. And of course, one of them is thou shalt not bear false witness. And I like to use that in conversations about moral, and say, according to God, it is always wrong in any context, at any time, in any place, anywhere in the universe to bear false witness. Now, I think that's what generally I think of when I think of a moral, is something
that's a shame.
Categorical.
Yeah.
I don't think those exist. What I would, though, agree on is what you're talking about. And that sounds to me like a hypothetical norm. And that I understand. That I would have no problem with. So it sounds to me like what you're implying, and what other people have implied to me in the past, is that you're okay saying these categorical things don't exist. that's okay. But you also need to get on board, Vox, with the idea that the hypothetical stuff is there, and that's what you really need to be concentrating on. And I think I agree with you.
Yeah, metaethics went off the rails in English language philosophy about 150 years ago because they tried to combine what they thought was right about the myth model of morality, commandments from God, and if we all just believe, we'll all sing Kumbaya and humanity will be united, with the math model of morality. They wanted to keep the cognitivism. They wanted reason in charge, which, since Plato was sort of the backup plan to guarantee universal assent, but they combined two things that aren't really compatible and ended up with a complete mess, and they committed the fallacy of false dichotomy. What they tried to do was combine the realism of mathematics, the sort of mind-independent status. They tried to get a little Platonic, or at least naturalistic. They went hunting around for morality in the world independent of all humans, which is not our theory. Money is not independent of all of humanity. It's very human. With that sort of deontological command structure that you get from myth, as long as you've got everybody's buy-in. And what happened, of course, was cognitivism was torn apart, and you got all kinds of loony theories trying to, keep together what they put asunder. But it's a complete false dilemma of their own making. The right answer is to go with the money model, because you get a social ontology, which is not subjectivist, and it isn't crazy Platonist realist either. So you get a fine measure of objectivity. You get your moral cognitivism. There's a reason why we think that there are reasons for better and worse moral judgment and right and wrong. Plus, you get the social engineering, which means we can explain kind of how we got to where we are and why we have reasonable hope for the moral improvement of humanity if we're willing to put in the hard work. But just combining sort of the greatest hits of the math model with the myth model has been disastrous in English language moral philosophy over the last couple hundred years at least. In the Cartesian tradition, French philosophy has gone round and round with this, with the exception of the moral anthropologists. They managed to escape that trap. And in the German language, German philosophy has done a better job with social ontology. The English language philosophers, after John Locke, abandoned the concept of social ontology as bad metaphysics. So they ignored things like Hegel and Dilthey and that tradition. So they just missed the analogy with money altogether.
Yeah, it's funny. I have had people say to me, Vox, you like Mackie. What are you doing telling us that something is right or wrong? And I do think they missed the mark on the fact that I've never really denied the utility of morality, but I would agree with you that that there seems to be, as to your money like analogy, there seems to be a lot of that lacking, the sociology of morality. And of course, I think there's been a push for it, because it's been pushed back onto me. They said, well, Kat, that's not what we mean by morality anymore. It's not. When we talk about it, what we mean is kind of like what you're saying, the social ontology of it, our values, and whether or not our values are conducive to our goals. And whether or not those goals can be sustained, and whether or not, if we add in health and well-being of the planet or something like that, whether or not, and that all makes sense. And if there's a gap in literature, then of course I would have missed the fact that we've moved past the conversations about whether or not categorical norms are the things that we need to be looking for, because it does seem that categorical norms in this sense would be metaphysically non-existent. Um, and so there's got to be something else. So I've always just operated under the idea that whatever y'all are doing, it's almost like you guys are reenacting Harry Potter, and it seems to be very valuable for society for you to reenact Harry Potter. I recognize that Harry Potter's fiction, but it seems to be working fairly well. Well, at least in Europe, it seems to be working fast, because it does seem that America is fighting. Like America seems to really be on my side here, or at least what I think. Like that there are universal rights and universal wrongs, and abortion is just wrong, or a woman's right to choose is right, or the ability to own guns, or all these things that we talk about morality, and they operate on this very black and white in America on most of these things. There's not a lot of wiggle room in the middle, and if you want to live in the middle, you have a very hard time making friends.
Well, in the absence of social intelligence and enough democracy, the conservatives have every advantage for getting exceedingly dogmatic and either retreating up the mountaintop to whatever Yahweh said, or, get dogmatic about old scriptures or old documents. The Constitution should be a living document. That's why the framers founded it, because they expressly called it an experiment in democracy. The price is, though, you have to try to be intelligent about the nature of rights. So view these not as categorical and timelessly universal, like, math, right? Think of more of them as Kant did, regulative ideals. Let me give you another analogy, since we're talking about social engineering. I'll borrow an analogy from real engineering. It turns out that all kinds of societies across the planet, but that doesn't mean that bridge building is like mathematics. Instead, what we have is a convergence story. That is to say, given enough societies, given enough experimentation, given enough time and materials, societies will sort of get to all 7 of them, or at least a large subset of them if they've got enough materials. So this, again, is a success of experimentation. If you look at the most important regulative ideals of morality, it turns out that everywhere on the planet, every human society is trying to teach this sort of core morality, a set of fundamental principles to all the children, and they keep imposing, don't, unless you have very good justification, take away the liberty of somebody else, and so on and so forth. They're connected to a core set of virtues in action. But it's no coincidence that if you took a 6-year-old, plucked it from its society, and plunked it down in the middle of any other human society on the surface of the earth completely at random, there's going to be a language problem and a lot of confusion. But the morality expected of a 6-year-old is not going to be a source of confusion. The fundamental rules of kindergarten are the same everywhere across the planet. Now, where things get complicated is the extra superstructure built on top of that of cultural expectations. By the time somebody is 16, the basic principles, the regulative ideals of morality are still the same, but how you actually fulfill them turns out to depend on status, sex, gender, wealth, all kinds of ways. We're busily sorting each other. So that's where cultural morality tends to fragment. But that doesn't mean the core goes away. It gets fulfilled, but just in one way in one culture, in a very different way in another culture. And so it's easy to get lost in cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is accurate enough. Anthropology agrees. But with a discerning eye, moral anthropology can also detect that common core, which is universal to humanity, which means it must have a deep evolutionary history. It must go back at least to Homo erectus, if not earlier. We're a hypersocial species. Cooperation has got to prevail in quite small societies, 30, 60, 100 individuals. So morality was absolutely necessary. Our brains were going to get there, our biological engineering back to the core, and then we inventively have been refining it ever since.
So what is the reason that you say that the Germans kind of have gotten it? The French,
well, they kind of always had it. They never lost it.
Flirting with it.
Yeah.
But let's just talk about Germany for a little bit then, though. So what explains Germany then? If Germany always had it, if we got Kant, we got Hegel, we got Hume, right? And like what explains Weimar? Did they just have collectively just say, screw it, we're just not going to pay attention to everything that we had?
Well, Germany has had a rough political history, much rougher than America for all kinds of historical reasons. But philosophically, Germany never became as enamored with either Aquinas or Descartes or Plato, for that matter. German philosophy, for the most part, across most historical eras, was far more comfortable with Aristotle, who does have the social ontology of morality and politics that we're talking here. Aristotle sort of got the basics to economics. And
I have no idea why I threw David Hume in there, by the way. I don't know why that happened.
Both David Hume and Adam Smith are closer to the Germans than John Locke ever was. But the big figure in avoiding Descartes was Leibniz. Leibniz offered an excessively rationalistic metaphysics, but nevertheless a metaphysics in which it demanded the absolute cohesion and coordination of all human souls. That is to say, nobody could be an individual human soul with already being in a sort of pre-established harmony, or at least a sort of functional, organic, holistic picture. And that organic holism really drove much of the agenda of German philosophy going forward, right through Hegel and the idealists like Schelling. Herder is a deeply important figure, Goethe, and then of course on to folks like Dilthey, some of the phenomenologists. In America, that German tradition is in pragmatism, so that's why pragmatism would be the one exception to what otherwise has been going on in Anglo-American philosophy. Pragmatism understands the social ontology to morality.
So Peirce,
George Herbert Mead, and that crew.
So basically, then you think, and stop me if I'm wrong here, but you would say then really that Cowie and Roland and Mackey are really just not doing morality.
They're doing plenty of moral philosophy. The problem is they're trying to combine sort of the worst aspects of two competing models of morality. They think that they have to argue over the moral cognitivism, which is fine. Everybody should be a moral cognitivist because of the social ontology. But that's where they miss out. They took for their analogy math or some sort of pure natural science. So they're, careening around physical nature independent of all humanity, looking for, some tether, some ground.
Properties.
And they'll never find it.
Yeah, we're looking for. Well, as I said, I called it, the moral spooky action at a distance, so to speak. Because what we're looking for is, we're saying, so the moral proposition, from a cognitivist perspective, which of course I am, is truth apt. Right, the proposition is truth apt. So it's got a truth value. It's going to be true or false.
And the question is, what could possibly be responsible for discovering whether it is true or false? And too many English language metaethicists muck it up completely. The right answer is actual social experimentations in the past having proven their value, plus future experimentations to see if they might be improved. The social ontology grounds the truth aptness of moral judgments.
Well, I guess this is why the error theory approach was kind of tossed around when I gave the ontology of gender discussion, because of course gender is not kinds, it is not a description of it's a social ontology. Gender is a social ontology. It is hypothetically normative. And that makes sense. And of course, when the error theory approach came up with that, I said, well, okay, so I guess you'd just be a fictionalist about all this. But that makes sense. That makes quite a bit of sense. So if we pause for a moment and we think about morality, we look at it. So I guess like the two main areas, and for the audience, this is mostly for the audience, we would have like cognitivism here and we'd have non-cognitivism here, and we just take the non-cogs and just kind of toss them. No,
whatever it is they think they're talking about, it's just not morality, so we can exclude them.
Yeah, so we just kind of throw the non-cognitivists away, and so then with the cognitivists, we've got kind of like, I guess, like realism, like Platonic realism. We've got the
naturalism,
relativists,
maybe?
naturalism, moral naturalism, and the moral naturalism is something. I had a debate with a moral philosopher a while back, and he is, I guess, like a quasi-naturalist, but he wanted to posit that we could in fact find the one true universal objective thing, and that would be that it's an imposition of will. So an involuntary imposition of will is universally immoral, even though we have pragmatic reasons to violate it. And of course, I think that's where the discussion with him kind of went off the rails, because it seems if, regardless of whether it's hypothetical or categorical, if we've got a reason to violate it, it's probably not a good thing to call moral. But yeah, moral naturalism. And then of course, well, I guess you got realism, error theory, and relativism.
And our theory, moral socialism.
And is moral socialism the fourth category that you had hinted to earlier on when you gave your three?
So we're just talking about our cognitivists. So we can subdivide the cognitivists pretty neatly. The first kind are the ones still clinging to realism, right? They want it to turn out to be like math, or at least, physics or something like that.
Naturalists
so
and non-naturalists.
They're looking for something inhuman, and so we can write them off because they're just going to miss the fact that, social ontology is a perfectly legitimate ontology. The moral naturalists have more of a chance if they are what I like to call broad or liberal naturalists. That is to say, their naturalism, like a Dilthey or a John Dewey, is broad enough to include a robust social ontology in addition to, your material or physicalist ontology. Societies are just as real as forests. We're part of nature. So that would be the natural grounding to social ontology. I don't see a big metaphysical chasm, but some naturalists do. They like their naturalism pure and sparkling. They exclude anything mental or human from it. And I think those folks, the moral inhumanists, they've run off the rails too. So let's stick with a moral naturalism that includes a robust social ontology. The next thing you have to answer is what we were talking about earlier. If moral judgments are cognitive, what sort of reasons are apt to make a moral judgment more likely to turn out to be true or not? That is to say, what is it that makes moral propositions or, sort of categorical rules more reasonably accepted as correct? Given the social ontology we then have a social utility theory of the proper function of moralizing and moral punishment and all the things that keep morality going in the real world. So we're cognitivists, we're not expressivists, because we think, you and I think, that morality does real palpable work in the world. We're just not shouting into the hurricane. So there's a and this I got from my teacher, R.M. Hare. I didn't agree entirely with his utilitarianism and how he did it, but he called his theory prescriptivism. In other words, the proper function of moral judgments and why we think they are cognitive backed by reasons is because they are reasonable prescriptions, regulative guidance rules for how people ought to normally function in society and regulate their behavior. That is to say, they're not descriptions, they're normative. Moral judgments are not trying to describe how we actually do behave. That's a mixed bag. But how we should behave. Given the social ontology, there's no weird realism problem. We know where the ontology for these prescriptions are, so we don't need to drift off into, weirdness problems about, what these prescriptions are about. They're about the proper regulation of our social ontology, how we conduct ourselves, favoring cooperation over conflict.
So let's, for the audience, then ask to run, with a little bit of Hume here, and say, using social ontology, does social ontology bring us to the ought?
Well, sure, because you're not going to be functioning as a hypersocial species without normativity thoroughly infusing our habitual conduct. In fact, that's what we mean by habitual conduct. It's normative.
So if we value social cohesion and, say, shared goal achieving and survival, which I think most...
That's not so much of a hypothetical. That is descriptive of humanity as we know it.
Yeah. But it does seem to be something that we hold kind of, across all societies, irrespective of the environment they find themselves in. And if we hold that value, then I guess we could say that we ought behave in a way that, or we should behave in a way that is conducive to, at least over a period of time, achieving those goals.
And exactly what you said, that sort of regulative ideal, sounds trite, if not tautologous, but it is what ethics is about. That is to say, given the point and purpose of morality, how can we do it effectively and promote it, ward off all sorts of human tendencies to degrade it, and try to be better people into the future?
So, just out of curiosity, there's an area of subjectivism that's kind of underneath cultural subjectivism, I think. Divine command theory. So they fall into the subjectivist branch, right along with like ideal observer theory. So what do they have wrong? What does the command theorist have wrong?
Well, the divine command theorist falls under the category of modeling it on myth. That is to say, they think that no morality is secure anywhere unless morality is secure everywhere. They tend to think in a sort of paranoid fashion about morality, precisely because they want to project it onto the universe, and then they panic because they worry that nothing sufficiently authoritative is going to undergird it. Now, some of these folks drift off into the Platonism of the math model, but for those who still need an agent, a father figure, a mother figure to command everybody to conform, so, they'll attach morality to religion in a rather rigid way. What they actually accomplish is a kind of ultra-rigid traditionalism, which then makes them immune from having to think any further about their collective delusion, which is very convenient for a collective delusion. It's relief from paranoia. They no longer have to worry about encountering anybody who might significantly disagree with them. They would be immoral reprobates, and they can be safely ignored or punished. And they want a very hierarchical top-down command structure, so there's never any doubt. These are people that cannot handle any doubt in matters moral. That's why that kind of dogmatic mythicism about morality aligns itself very neatly and is usually found with various types of paranoias and xenophobias about cultural differences. And that causes wars. Not helpful.
So then, so it seems that if we, just agree that, I guess what I take away from this is two things. You're right.
Bonus.
But so am I. And what I mean by that,
I figured we'd get to the same place. This is a convergent abductive story we're telling, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so then I guess the question for, I think, like an audience member that's watching this goes, what do we do with the really murky gray stuff? Like now that we've kind of settled on, okay, you know what, these categorical things that Kat talks about, she's right. They don't exist, and we shouldn't really bother with them. We really shouldn't, think that we can identify these properties that exist, mind independent, that are gonna tell us how to universally act. That we should, that Dr. Shook is correct, that morality is going to be the social thing. But I think that people do kind of have this idea that we do try to need to go towards the black because the black and the white, because the gray can be very scary, because there can be situations in the gray where we just don't know what to do and we have to act, right? You give, and this may be disanalogous here, but when you take one of your students who's in one of your, say, beginning classes, and you introduce them to the trolley problem, right? You can act, you cannot act, but something's gonna happen, right? And of course, that's a fairly generally black and white example, right? I mean, obviously, you pull the lever for the one that's gonna kill the least amount of people, absent any other information. But oftentimes we have a lot of information and we don't know what to do with it. So when we find ourselves in America, we don't have this Hegelian tradition in America, so to speak. When we're so currently right now in America, there are two things happening. And so we'll bring some current events in to kind of maybe wrap this up a little bit. So there's two things that are going on in America. We have transgender sports laws now as the fear tactic that are being passed in several states. That's a moral question as much as it is a biological question. And of course, we have some really, really restrictive abortion rights bills currently being passed. And I think one passed today that basically just eliminates the right to abortion for anybody in Arkansas. And so, of course, that's a moral question as much as it is a social question. And it doesn't seem like we can agree, say, in the abortion question, we can agree that life, in a biological sense, begins when two gametes join together, right? That's just a biological fact. But is it okay to kill it? And is it and who gets to say what? And so we're lacking this tradition, this social ontology is just so how what do we do with that? Like what is like almost like a quick and dirty toolkit that we can reach to say, okay, here's a situation that I find myself in. What are the tools up with a solution? Because we seem to be lacking that in American discourse across a multitude of topics.
Sure. So what you have to do when you have somebody with, very, very attached to a moral proposition is you have to respectfully ask, what would be different about society into the future if everybody decided you were right? In other words, what would be the longer term systemic consequences in the real world if you're right and your opposition is wrong? Similarly, the opposed position should be able to describe, what society would be like, because these are big decisions, as you point out. They have vast social ramifications for all kinds of freedoms, other civil liberties, economic opportunity, prejudices of all sorts. I mean, society quakes at these deep moral problems. But if you're going to assert a proposition about something so morally important, you had better back up your position with reasons having to do with accepting responsibility for all of the broader social consequences to everybody, without exception and without deception. If you're not willing to do that, then you should be excluded from public debate, and you shouldn't be a politician because you're unintelligent. If you think that consequences never matter, if you think that other people don't matter, if you think that it's right or wrong and, consequences be damned, you're just revealing your own dogmatic stupidity and probably paranoia and xenophobia, and quite possibly other prejudices and racisms and God knows what psychological problems we've got going on here. So we have to admit that there are broader consequences, and those who will not accept responsibility to the broader consequences, if they're right, not even if they're wrong, if they're right, if they won't even accept responsibility, they should be excluded from this grand social experiment that we call democracy. Now, taking a stand on something fundamental as a human right should be respected because there is a collective wisdom. It's not a coincidence that many civilizations, past and present, have converged on a relatively small handful of very important human rights and, if not quite civil liberties, sort of a sense of civil rights and wrongs that any legitimate government ought to respect. This was true of ancient Rome and ancient China, as it is even today. So this means that we're going to have to take political responsibility for the consequences of enacting morality into policy. Anybody who puts on their blinders and says, no, we got to obey God and the consequences are on God, they've just removed themselves from the public space of reasonable discourse. We don't have to listen to them. This is a view of John Rawls. He wasn't much of a consequentialist, but he did demand intelligent, responsible consideration of all of the consequences upon everybody possibly affected. This is Politics 101 with John Dewey as well. Dewey and Rawls are very close on this. If you've got opposed parties willing to draw up and compare all the possible consequences to society, if they're right, then we can reason about the relative costs and benefits to which kind of future society we want. That's all we're asking here. Now you're has a temporary win because the next generation coming up behind us, they will judge us, and they will judge us harshly if we don't try to take this responsibility seriously. But fortunately, they have the privilege of course correction once again.
So it seems like then, from my perspective, that we could conclude that we are having in America right now, we are suffering from a very unintelligent discourse, because it does seem that we are being forced to listen to many people who are just saying, consequences be damned. It is that they are saying that this is my belief, that this thing guides me, and this thing has rules, and I must follow those rules, and those rules supersede these rules. And then, of course, on the other side, we have almost a lack of words. English language has 1.3 million words. How can we have a lack of words? I don't know, but it seems like we have a lack of words on the other side, or at least a lack of ability to use words that people can understand.
America used to have this kind of discourse. Read old speeches from Jefferson and Madison, or Lincoln or Roosevelt. But our political language has become emaciated because we need shouting words.
Yeah. Well, I think I've basically run out of questions for you, Dr. Shook. This has been, I really, if I had the time, I'd come and sit in on some of your classes.
You'd be very welcome.
I would really enjoy it. And this has just been a lot of fun. This really, and it's really, I came into this hoping that my eyes would be opened, and they have. So I do appreciate it.
Well, if there's a takeaway, keep looking around, because
Absolutely.
We're just telling a fragment of the story, and hopefully we got a glimmer of what we're trying to see. But there's so much more to see. Humanity is so complicated.
It really is. It really is.
Well, congratulations,
All right.
Dr. Shook. It is not easy to impress Vox. Trust me on that one. So, well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Shook, once again for gracing us. We always enjoy having you, and we'll hit you up with another. And I know we had someone else contact you on the booking, and we're going to be using her, I think, from now on going forward. So I appreciate you bearing with us. She's new, but she's been doing a good job, so thank you. We will, let's see, we're going to do overtime on Thursday. We'll be covering, what's new in the news and politics in the U.S., and we also will be having a patron hangout next week. So if you have not yet become a patron and want to, and those are to any level of patron, if you are a patron or support the channel in any way, you are welcome, and we'll do a hang and just chat about whatever you guys want to talk about.
Click the like button, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button. You know you love us. You know you love us. In fact, hitting that like button, we can feel that, right? It comes through the screen. We've got vibrators, and we can feel it,
I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, somebody hit the like button. I can I was asleep.
Hit the like button. But it does help, it gets us out here. And you know what? People need to hear these conversations. So just, share it with a friend, put it on YouTube, put it on Twitter, get the metrics up so that we can get these messages out. Because you know what? Dr. John Shook deserves to be heard on these things. Let's get the message out.
And your support is what makes it possible for us to bring guests like him on. So thank you. Vox absolutely has it. So thank you all very much, and we'll be seeing you on Thursday. Night all.